The last bell of the day rang with a shrill note, and the school corridors erupted in a flood of laughter, chatter, and hurried footsteps. Backpacks bounced against little shoulders as children rushed toward the exit, their excitement carrying them forward like a current. Teachers gave quick reminders, waving goodbye to their students before disappearing into their own routines. The air buzzed with energy, but in the middle of the chaos, one corner of the hallway seemed to be stuck in a different world. On the polished linoleum floor, a little girl sat crumpled against the wall, knees drawn tightly to her chest, her small shoulders shaking. She wasn't just crying, she was unraveling. Her breaths came shallow and fast, like she was trapped in a storm only she could feel. Her face, hidden behind strands of messy hair, glistened with tears. Around her, the world kept moving, not out of cruelty, but out of blindness. People assumed someone else would handle it. Teachers were overloaded, students were too self-absorbed, and the river of life swept on. But not everyone was blind. At the far end of the hallway, Thomas pushed his mop bucket slowly, the squeak of the wheels echoing against the walls. He was the janitor, a single dad who'd been patching together long days and longer nights just to make ends meet. His uniform was faded, his back often sore, and his hands rough with calluses from years of work that no one noticed. Most people walked past him without a second thought. But Thomas noticed everything. It was part of who he was, someone who saw the small things that others overlooked. And he noticed her. He paused mid-step, his mop leaning awkwardly against the bucket as he studied the little girl. Something inside him tugged hard, the kind of tug that no conscience could ignore. He had seen that same tight chest, those panicked breaths, and trembling hands before, on his own daughter, Emma, who sometimes woke in the night from nightmares too big for her small body. He knew what panic looked like. He knew the helplessness of not being able to breathe. Quietly, he set his mop aside. His boots clicked softly as he approached, careful not to startle her. He crouched down to her level, his knees protesting but his heart steady. "Hey," he said gently, his voice carrying no judgment, no rush. "Just calm. It's okay. You're safe." The girl didn't look at him, her sobs still hitching in uneven waves. Words, Thomas realized, wouldn't reach her yet. She was too far inside her storm. And then he remembered, Emma's storms had never been soothed by words either. He reached into the pocket of his uniform, fingers brushing against a small plastic bottle. It was a silly thing for a grown man to carry around, some might say, but he never went anywhere without it. It had saved more moments than he could count. He pulled it out slowly, the clear liquid glinting under the fluorescent lights. With practiced care, he unscrewed the cap, lifted the wand, and took a slow, steady breath. Then, he blew. A cluster of bubbles drifted into the air, fragile spheres shimmering with rainbows of pink, green, and gold. They floated upward, catching the hallway lights, spinning and dancing as though they belonged to another world. One bubble landed gently on the girl's sleeve before popping with a soft spark of light. Her sobs hiccuped to a pause. She lifted her head slightly, eyes swollen and red, but her gaze followed the next bubble as it wobbled through the air. Another breath, another stream of bubbles. This time, one floated right in front of her face before bursting into a tiny mist. Her lips trembled, not with a sob, but with the beginnings of wonder. Thomas said nothing. He just kept blowing. Slowly, patiently, the girl's chest rose and fell more evenly now, each bubble somehow pulling her back to the present, away from the storm. She reached out a tentative hand, trying to catch one, and when it popped against her palm, a small, fragile giggle escaped. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Thomas's chest ache with relief. "That's it," he murmured softly, as though speaking to the air more than to her. "See, the storm always passes." The hallway had quieted now, most of the children gone. The few who remained glanced curiously, but none interrupted. To them, it was just a janitor and a girl with bubbles. To Thomas, it was a battle won in silence. The girl finally looked at him, her wide eyes reflecting the shimmering orbs floating between them. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her breathing was steady again, her trembling slowed. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of red but no more tears. Thomas gave her a small smile, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly, offering her the bubble wand. "Want to try?" She hesitated, then reached out, her small fingers curling around the plastic. She dipped it clumsily, lifted it, and blew. A thin stream of bubbles burst forth, and her eyes lit up with pride. Another giggle, this time louder, freer. Thomas chuckled, watching her joy bloom. For a moment, the exhaustion of his day melted away. For a moment, he wasn't just a janitor cleaning messes no one cared about. He was a dad, a protector, a comforter. Someone who knew that sometimes the smallest gestures, like a bubble, could hold the biggest power. And so they sat there in the quiet hallway, a little girl and a janitor, filling the empty space with shimmering orbs that rose and popped, like tiny reminders that even fragile things could bring strength. Neither of them knew that someone else was watching. Neither of them knew that this simple act would ripple far beyond the walls of that school. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that a storm had been calmed, not with lectures or grand gestures, but with kindness small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Evelyn Carter had been walking the school halls with her usual brisk stride, the kind that made people instinctively step out of her way. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor, a rhythm that matched her reputation, unshakable, efficient, always in control. She was a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, a billionaire whose name was spoken with a mix of respect and intimidation in boardrooms across the country. Yet here, in this quiet hallway, all of her power felt useless. Her daughter, Lily, had been struggling for months. Evelyn had thrown every resource she could find at the problem: therapists, specialists, expensive toys, trips to exotic places meant to distract and heal. But nothing had worked. Lily's episodes always came back, storms of panic that left Evelyn feeling helpless, powerless in a way she had never experienced before. No amount of money, no empire she owned, no decision she made in business could fix this. And for a woman like Evelyn, that truth was unbearable. As she turned the corner that afternoon, she expected to see her daughter alone, maybe curled up on the floor the way the teachers had described in hushed tones during their last meeting. What she didn't expect was the sight that met her eyes. Her little girl wasn't alone. Down the hall, she saw a man crouched beside Lily, his uniform unmistakably the dark blue of the school's janitorial staff. Evelyn almost bristled at first. Who was this man? Why was he so close to her daughter? But before she could step forward, she froze. Because she saw the bubbles. They floated in the fluorescent light, glimmering like tiny rainbows suspended in the air. They spun and wobbled before bursting, only to be replaced by more, and more, and more. And there was Lily, her hands reaching out, her lips curling into a giggle Evelyn hadn't heard in what felt like forever. The tightness in her daughter's face was gone, replaced by awe, by peace. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand against her chest, as if to hold in the swell of emotion that threatened to break free. For weeks, for months, she had longed to see Lily smile without forcing it, to hear laughter untainted by fear. And here it was, blossoming right in front of her. Not because of her, not because of all the expensive help she had tried to provide. But because of this man with tired eyes and rough hands, who sat cross-legged on the floor, blowing bubbles with the patience of someone who understood storms. Evelyn felt her vision blur with tears, an unfamiliar sting. She wasn't used to crying, not in boardrooms, not in negotiations, not even at her lowest. But now she stood rooted to the spot, watching, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Finally, she stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The sound made Thomas glance up, startled, the bubble wand still in his hand. He rose quickly, almost embarrassed, wiping his hands against his uniform as though he had been caught doing something wrong. But Evelyn saw nothing wrong. She saw something extraordinary. "Sir," she began, her voice softer than it had been in years, trembling slightly with emotion, "you don't know what you've just done for my daughter." Thomas shifted awkwardly, his eyes flicking to Lily, who still clutched the bubble wand, her face glowing with the remnants of joy. I just wanted to help," he murmured. She seemed like she needed a little calm, that's all. But to Evelyn, it wasn't small. It wasn't simple, it was everything. She knelt beside Lily, pulling her into her arms, pressing her cheek against her daughter's hair. Lily's small body relaxed into her, but her eyes never left the bubbles clinging to the air. Evelyn held her tightly, then lifted her gaze to Thomas again. For weeks, Nothing has worked, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I've hired experts, bought everything I thought could help, but none of it reached her. And here you are, with a bottle of bubbles, doing what no one else could. Thomas shook his head, humility etched across his face. Sometimes it's the little things, he said quietly. Sometimes kids don't need much. Just someone to sit with them until the storm passes. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had built a life where bigger was always better. Bigger deals, bigger homes, bigger solutions. But here was proof that smallness, simplicity, carried its own kind of power. She studied him for a long moment. His uniform was worn, his shoes scuffed, his posture a little tired. But his eyes carried something she had rarely seen, even among people at the top of their fields. Compassion. The kind that couldn't be bought, only lived. The world needs more men like you, she whispered, meaning every word. Thomas looked down, embarrassed, almost as though he didn't believe her. But Evelyn meant it. She had spent her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Her time, her approval, her money. Yet this man wanted nothing. He had given freely, instinctively, without any expectation of reward. Her mind spun with possibilities, with gratitude too big for words. She could change his life with a single phone call, could offer him things he'd never dared to dream of. But for once, Evelyn didn't think about business. She didn't think about power. She thought about humanity. She thought about how her daughters' laughter had returned because someone cared enough to stop sweeping floors and start blowing bubbles. In that moment, something shifted inside her. She realized that wealth wasn't always measured in dollars or companies or influence. Sometimes, the greatest wealth was in kindness, the kind that could soothe a child's panic, the kind that could reach places no money ever could. Evelyn stood, still holding Lily close, and gave Thomas one last look. It was a look of gratitude, yes, but also of recognition. Recognition that heroes didn't always wear suits or command empires. Sometimes, they wore janitors' uniforms and carried bubble bottles in their pockets. And as the bubbles continued to drift through the hallway, shimmering before they burst, Evelyn knew she had just witnessed something priceless. Something that would stay with her, and with her daughter, forever.